So like I said, today we're going to talk about invasive species, and I just want to introduce the concept of that really quickly. There we go. So this is a definition that I really like. Native species is a species that exists within its natural ecosystem that does not cause harm to the ecosystem and was not introduced by outside human intervention. However, an invasive species is a species that does not naturally exist in an ecosystem and it ends up causing harm. And a lot of times these invasive species are introduced via outside intervention. A lot of times that's through human activity, and they also cause harm to the ecosystem, and that's really what makes them invasive. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this today with one of our guest speaker presentations, but I just want to introduce the concept for you guys. So here is an example of something that you may be familiar with. This picture on the left here. Let's find this little pointer. There we go. So this picture right here, you're probably familiar with this if you've driven down the interstate. This is just a kudzu outbreak. This was a big topic of discussion a few years ago. And so what's happening is this plant is an invasive species and it is outcompeting all of the other plants in this area. So that means those other plants are not going to be able to grow up through the cover that the kudzu has provided. They're just going to be completely outcompeted. They're not going to be able to grow. And that is going to negatively affect the ecosystem in that area. So what happens is we are not going to have those native plants that a lot of our wildlife depend on, that a lot of our pollinators depend on. It's just going to cause a lot of harm. This example over here is something you may not be as familiar with. This is an emerald ash borer gallery left behind. This picture was actually taken at the EERC. So these are tiny little beetles that get into these ash trees and essentially just destroy the tree. And because of that, that's going to cause a lot of harm to the native area. So how did this happen in the first place? Like I said, the biggest factor when introducing invasive species to an area is through human intervention. So a lot of times people will buy these really nice ornamental plants that look super nice, but they're not native to the area, and they're just it's very easy for them to take over. So invasive species are not always going to be about plants or insects. A lot of times it can also include animals. So we see a lot of issues with exotic pets being bought, and sometimes people are unable to care for those pets once they reach a certain size, and they end up being released into the wild. And that causes a lot of issues because they don't have natural predators. So those populations are really able to just take off. Another problem in way that they have been introduced to the area is through just shipments. So a lot of times we'll have like larvae or seed pods that are accidentally in soils. Invasive aquatic species will be attached to shipment containers, and they end up traveling to new areas that way. So here's a couple of examples of once they are in this new introduced area, the spread does not stop there. They do continue to spread from there. So a lot of times we'll see, especially with like aquatic species, we'll see this example right over here. This is a boat rudder that is completely covered in invasive mussels. So if we're not cleaning those off, a lot of times those get dragged to new areas and introduced to new waterways. You may have heard, don't ever move your firewood long distances. That's because a lot of insects and even invasive fungi can get in there and you accidentally transport it to a new area and end up infecting that area. And so that's become a little bit of a problem. And then again, we also have those invasive exotic pets. So what are some ways that we can help slow this spread? Well, we can make sure that we clean all of our equipment. So when we go boating, we make sure that we clean off our boat when we're finished. We make sure that we're like cleaning our boots, our fishing poles. We're making sure that we even clean our vehicles. That way that we are not spreading the invasive species to a new area. We can also follow existing guidelines. So for those of you who may have visited a natural park recently, you may have noticed boot brushes at the beginning of trails. And so what that is they're asking you to clean off your boots to make sure that you're not introducing different like seed pods or anything that may have been stuck to the bottom of your boots into those new areas, and making sure that any existing invasive species from those trails also do not get transported off the property. Another way that we can slow this spread is using native plants for gardening. A lot of people get what looks to be the prettiest thing, but that may not be what is best for your local ecosystem. And reporting outbreaks is always very, very, very important. A couple examples we're going to hear about later today and in more depth from our guest speakers are going to be using chemical control and biological control to combat these invasive species. So here I've just put together a list of some contacts that would be really good if you're dealing with any of these invasive species. So you can report any kind of infestations to the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council. This thing is really nice. It kind of has a super inclusive map of Kentucky, and you can report where exactly you found these things, how much, you can help identify and that kind of thing. We also have the Kentucky's Least Wanted Plants list, and what's really fun about this one is it is updated year by year. So we talk about which ones are going to be causing the most harm that year, which ones we should be watching out for the most. And if you have any trouble identifying, or if you just want to report, you can also go to IMAP Invasives, which is a really good comprehensive website where you can talk about where you have found certain invasive outbreaks and that kind of stuff. And they also have a really nifty phone app that you can use. So here's some other resources. I talked briefly about You Can Plant Native Plants. This is a really good resource where it is a list of a bunch of different native plant nurseries in Kentucky. You can just scroll through and kind of browse and see what you like. And we also have the EERC info sheet where you can go and report any kind of outbreaks that you see. Some of the things listed on that info sheet we didn't talk about today due to time, but we can also, it's also a very important thing for you to be aware of. And so as we finish up the presentation today, I do want to leave you with some key terms that we have worked on and that will come up throughout the rest of the day with our guest speaker presentations. So I want you to keep an eye out for native plants, invasive plants, herbicides, pesticide, and biological control. And as always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at caitlin.goatee@kysu.edu.